So recently, I got into a discussion about why game directors should be competent at their own games. The analogy that I made is that a game director making a game outside of their skill level doesn't make sense. It's like a chef making fondue that's lactose intolerant. If the food's bad, that explains a lot. The origin of this discussion is from an interview Miyazaki had with The Guardian, where he said the following. But in preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games, so my approach, or playstyle, was to use everything I have at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also all the knowledge that I have as the architect of the game. The freedom and open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowered the barrier to entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else. It's not just that Miyazaki admits to being bad at his own games, it's more than that. It's that if what he's suggesting is true, that the freedom and open world nature unique to Elden Ring lowered the barrier of entry compared to other Souls games to allow even someone as bad at games as him to finish, that he as a player benefited the most from how it was designed. And what was his approach to playing that benefited him the most? To scrub the skill floor using every scrap of aid he had and his own knowledge as the creator. That's not improvement through failure. It's an open question to how much other low-level players who play like Miyazaki benefited compared to high-level players, and how the freedom and open world nature factor into that. It's not the subject of this video, but it might be for a future one. For the record, I'm not a fan of the Souls games. I don't think they're very good. The action gameplay is riddled with design issues. I think this interview was revelatory to why that is, but also what the appeal of these games really are. I made a joke that most indie game devs overdo the difficulty because they get too good at their own games. But this is the first time I hear someone overdo it because they suck at their own game. At this point in the conversation, the design issues with Elden Ring wasn't a point of contention. It was the director's skill at their own game and how that affected their ability to direct it, which in my view is what results in the design issues that the Souls series have. The main objection that got me to make the analogy that I did went like this. Making and playing games are different skills. This is true, by the way, this makes sense. And there's no reason why someone who isn't working on the challenges needs to be skilled at the games. That doesn't make sense. Really? No reason? And that includes Miyazaki. He's not the guy tuning attack animation timings or damage values. Why would he need to master the combat? Okay, and the most straightforward response is because he's the director. And it's not like he needs to master the combat. He just needs to be competent, to not suck. But why? Why should he not suck at his own game? That brings me to my analogy. A game director making a game outside of their skill level doesn't make sense. It's like a chef making fondue that's lactose intolerant. If the food's bad, that explains a lot. The meaning behind the analogy is that how you make things affect the final result. So when you experience the result of someone else's work, and that result is not good, and you're given an insight into how that work was made, you can infer a connection between the two. That a bad result is from a bad method. I figured this was self-explanatory, but as I polled other people's opinions, there was a pattern of adding an asterisk and saying that it might be possible, or taking the analogy too literally, and that if you follow a recipe, you can make good food, which is deliberately missing the point. There's a difference between possibility and probability. It's not about if it can be done. The question is if it's a good idea, if it's a good method. And I'm saying that if you can't play your own game, that's not a good idea. That's not a reliable way of making good games. Because there's a gap in understanding between a director's skill at playing their own game and the process in making it, I think it's worth going over. Since the topic is about how we make games, let's first answer what a game is. This is the definition from Half Real. A game is a rule-based system with a variable and quantifiable outcome where different outcomes are assigned different values. The player exerts effort in order to influence the outcome, and the consequences of the activity are optional and negotiable. Now, this is a very academic definition, but I bolded the most relevant words and phrases. Rule-based systems, meaning there are things you can and can't do. There's a structure. It's not freeform the way that toys are. Quantifiable outcomes is essentially winning and losing. The player exerting effort to influence the outcome basically means the player uses skill to win. So we're not talking about gambling here. That's its own thing. And there we have it. That is the experience that game developers are trying to create. The most meaningful part of a game is using skill to win. I understand that some people may have a more broad definition of game that involve things that aren't skill-based, but don't lose sight of what the topic is. For developers who are making skill-based challenges, which people would say is what the Souls games are, we're talking about how we make these kinds of games. Now, what do we mean by skill? I've put up several definitions here, and you'll notice a common thread. It's something you can learn, something you can practice. It's something that you can do well. Skill isn't something genetic where you have it or you don't. It's something you can get better at. And one of the most important skills that we have is this one right here, knowledge. Let's go back to the question before. How do we make games? We make games by using our knowledge, our experiences, and our understanding of those experiences to create the rule-based systems and series of gameplay challenges where players use skill to win. Is anyone really going to say that we make games by not using what we know? You'll notice I separated knowledge from experiences even though the two are related concepts. Let's break that down a little more by answering what experiences are. You'll see the commonalities from the definitions that I've gathered. Our experiences matter because it's the primary way we acquire knowledge, which is what we use to make games. If you have fewer experiences, you have fewer things to draw knowledge from. But what kind of experiences would we use to make games? Really, any that can be made useful. Our experiences from real life, from engaging with other works of art, from playing other games, and not just video games either, from our own experiences of using skill to win. Some of you may already see where I'm going with this. If you don't have many experiences of using skill to win, you don't have much knowledge to draw from. Now, one of the criteria I had was using our understanding of our experiences. So why does that matter? What does it mean to understand? You'll see some more definitions here where I've bolded common keywords and phrases. The third one is really good. The power to make experience intelligible by implying concepts. The last one is a secondary definition, but surprisingly relevant. Sympathetic to the feeling of others. Experiences serve as a basis of knowledge, but they don't guarantee it. Knowledge is a skill, and since understanding is a relation between the knower and thing to be known, this means that to understand something requires skill. Art in general, not just games, requires skill to understand. You need reading comprehension skill to understand the books you read. You need skill to understand more complicated and sophisticated movies and stories. You need skill to understand the games you play. If you don't have the skill, then you aren't able to enjoy it. If you don't have the skill, you aren't getting the intended experience out of the work of art. You aren't fit to critique it. You aren't fit to claim to understand it. The same way a critic's assessment of something they've never experienced isn't very valuable, a critic's assessment of something they're bad at isn't very valuable. You shouldn't take seriously someone's critique of Super Mario Bros. If they can't get past the 4th level. The experience is using skill to win. That's the thing you're trying to understand, and that's the thing you're trying to create for other people. Just being good at games, though, won't make you a good game developer. Heck, even being good at lots of games won't make you a good critic. What playing games is, though, is the foundation to be able to develop those skills. It's required, but not sufficient. The main objecting analogy is Beethoven. That because Beethoven went deaf by the time he finished the Ninth Symphony, It somehow disproves the idea that a creator requires the skill of an audience member to make something great. What this analogy fails to acknowledge is that Beethoven wasn't born deaf, so he had a lifetime of experiences where he could hear the music he was making before the last one he made before he died. Does anyone really think Beethoven didn't use his hearing to assess his own music or to experience and study other music while he still had it? No reasonable teacher would say to anyone else making music that they shouldn't listen to it. Remember, we're talking about good methods, not that it can be done, but if it's a good idea. Any good teacher will tell you that you should study your craft. Studying your craft is probably the most non-controversial statement that there is. Don't just read about Super Mario Bros., go play it. To make great food, you should taste and study great food. To make great music, you should listen to and study great music. To make great games, you should play and study great games. To make great works of art, you should experience and study great works of art. And vital to your ability to craft experiences for others is your ability to assess that experience for yourself. Hence my analogy. The food you taste, they will taste. The music you hear, they will hear. The game you play, they will play. This is why game directors should be skilled at their own games. You need skill because that's how you understand the gameplay, how skill is used to win. That's the meaningful part of the game. If the game is too hard, then you don't know how skill is used to win, or if it can be used at all. You essentially say that you don't understand the most meaningful part of your game. If the gameplay has issues, then it isn't surprising as to why.